Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and you might be wondering what we're doing here with Albedo. Well, I want to talk about some characters in Genshin that I feel like need buffs, characters whose kits I'd change in some way. I'd probably make this a series. I'm not going to talk about every single character in one video. That might be kind of a lot. But needless to say, I think some of the characters in Genshin where they were strong, maybe early on, in like 1.0 and 1.1, these characters were fine, or maybe even going into 2.0 or whatever, these characters' kits and like what they offered was fine and there wasn't really an issue. But I feel like the more characters have been added to the game, the more we see that maybe some of their scalings or just what they have to offer is just kind of lackluster to some of the newer characters we get. So I think it would be fun to talk about these characters and personally what I would change and what I would do differently, I guess. Now, before I jump right into it, I'm not going to say I'm an expert at game design. By no means am I an expert at game design. I just like the game, and I've played it for a very long time at this point, ever since 1.5. So, I mean, I feel like I know quite a few things, right? I understand a lot of characters' mechanics and what they want a character to do when they create certain characters. Like, if it's a sub-DPS character, they want them to deal damage from off-field and maybe offer some supportive capabilities. If it's a DPS character, they have a signature part of their kit that deals a lot of damage. Maybe it's their normal attacks, charged attacks, plunging attacks even, as we've seen in recent years. Skill, burst, form, you know, something like that. So, I don't know. I just think there are some characters who've either been released earlier in the game, like Albedo, who don't really offer the same thing that they used to, or like the strengths that they had in the early game have been power crept, so to say, or maybe it's just other characters just feel like they do slightly better things, even if it's not like a complete power creep. Hello there. What am I going to be talking about exactly when it comes to these characters? I guess for Albedo, my idea is just to talk about what he does currently. After that, I will go into why his kit doesn't really offer the same things as it once did. And or maybe characters who do very similar things, but they just do it better at this point. And then along with that, you know, the issues with his kit. I'll say quote-unquote issues because I love Albedo and I think he's still a good character. Like, I don't think by any means he's a bad character, even if other characters like Shiori maybe are a little bit better than him at what he does. But after that, I will go into what I would change. Again, I'm no expert in game design. I sometimes like creating characters' kits in my heads before the character is released. Like, I remember before Wriothesley's official release, I was just thinking about a little bit in my head. What would I want Wriothesley to do? Like, if he's a main DPS, like, what would I want his kit to look like? And where the kit that I thought of didn't end up being the one that they made, of course. Like, it was very different. They actually ended up releasing a character later called Lolly that I felt like was exactly what I thought Wriothesley was going to be. So you never know when they will just spring that kind of stuff on you, you know? And if this video sounds very, very casual, very unscripted, if I sound very unsure of what I'm saying sometimes, or if I pause for long periods of time, which if I do, I'll probably just cut that out. If I just sound very casual and not as scripted as I usually do when I make these kinds of videos, it is because there's no script. If I'm being honest, I kind of hate how I sound when I script my videos. I sound so customer servicey almost. And I feel like even if I want this type of video to become a series, I'm not going to focus on scripting it, because I feel like I started recording this more of an off-the-cuff, like, impulsive decision. I just decided, you know what, I'm gonna sit down, record my thoughts, and we'll see how it goes. Guys, there are some 4-leaf clovers here. There'll just be some gameplay footage in the background. Albedo might be walking around, I might be doing commissions. We'll see how it goes. So to start out, we should probably talk about what this character does, right? What was Albedo's intent on design. Ignore the fact that he is triple crowned. That's not important, okay? So Albedo is a Geo sub DPS character who is meant to just deal damage from off field, and along with that he can provide some sort of shielding because of the crystallized reaction. I think he's meant to be used with we'll say elemental DPSs excluding Geo and Anemo as a way for you to be able to get shields easily. Like, I know I use him in my Wanderer team, as you can see. He's kind of an extra, we can call it extra line of defense because I also have Toma in this team. Just as someone who can deal extra damage on the side and provide some shielding. Now, I know I said excluding Geo and Anemo DPSs. Can he work with those characters? Of course. He's also in my Ito team because Ito's a character that kind of likes a mono Geo team or a almost entirely mono Geo team. So let's look. His skill is the main part of his kit. That's the, we'll say that's the essential core of his kit. That's how he deals his off-field Geo damage and can help trigger Crystallize to provide shields for your characters. So he sets down this Solar Isotoma. We'll see that it has the following properties. When opponents within it take damage, the Solar Isotoma will generate Transient Blossoms, which deal AoE Geo damage. Damage dealt scales off of Albedo's defense. Transient Blossoms can only be generated once every 2 seconds. When a character is located at the locus of the Solar Isotoma will accumulate geopower to form a crystallized platform that lifts the character up to a certain height. Only one crystallized platform can exist at a time. Solar Isotoma is considered a geo-construct. Only one Solar Isotoma created by Albedo himself can exist at a time, and then you can hold down the skill to designate where to place it down, like to aim where you're going to place it. Now, the whole, like, crystallized platform thing, that's the elevator that we all know. The Albedo-vator, or however it's called. Do people have a word for that? I don't know. Albedo-vator, we'll call it that. That's what the platform is. The Solar Isotoma field in the Transient Blossoms, that's the off-field Geo damage that we see, AoE Geo damage, based on his defense. And then his burst just deals, we'll say, massive AoE Geo damage. I'm gonna be putting that in air quotes, though, because massive damage is debatable because of the scalings. But yeah, we'll see, like, Geo Crystal Surge 4th, and Burst, dealing AoE Geo damage in front of him if a Solar Isotoma created by Albedo himself is on the field. 7 Fatal Blossoms will be generated in the Solar Isotoma field, bursting violently into bloom. And dealing AoE Geo damage. So if he has his skill down and he casts his burst deals more damage. Now, what is the problem here? Because it sounds nice, right? And I guess we can take a look at his passive talents. Passive 1 says that the Transient Blossoms deal 25% more damage to opponents whose HP is below 50%. Great, you know, a lot of characters have stuff like this in their kits. Like, this is similar to Ayato's C1, Homuncular Nature. Using his burst increases elemental mastery of nearby party members for 125 for 10 seconds. I'm gonna be honest, I don't really remember this being part of his kit. Why does he increase elemental mastery? This might also be a thing I would change. I didn't even think about it. So what's the big deal? You know, we see he deals damage from off field, he can increase elemental mastery, which is nice, but I would say for a Geo character, that's kind of a weird thing to have. I might give my opinion on what should be changed there. But yeah, he scales off of defense, so you just use defense artifacts on him, right? Like that new Husk set. The new Husk set should be good, right? New. It's not new, is it? It's pretty old at this point. You used to be able to put Archaic Petra on him. I think that used to be the main set for him, but now it's the Husk of Opulent Dreams set, and now you can even put Golden Troop on him. Like, there are so many combinations you can do at this point. I personally run him on 2-piece Husk of Opulent Dreams, 2-piece of Archaic Petra, just for defense, Geo damage. I think that's pretty good. But my issue comes in with the skill attributes, which is where you see the scaling. Now, you'll see something that's kind of interesting here. When you see a percentage scaling for damage, and it has no other word after it, as we can see with the Transient Blossom damage, it says 240% defense, and this is at, you know, talent level 10. But if you see it without anything after that, so no defense, you don't see elemental mastery, you don't see HP, that means it scales off of attack. So the weird thing about Albedo is that the cast of his skill, so when you lay it down, it deals that initial burst of geo damage, we'll say, like, he lays down the field and it does geo damage. That scales off of his attack. But then the transient blossom damage, so we'll say like the coordinated attacks within the solar isotoma, deal damage based on defense. And you can probably already see what the issue is here. What's this split scaling going on here? Why does the cast of his skill scale on attack when the rest of it scales off of defense? Kind of a weird thing, you know? And then also the issue comes in with his burst, with Rite of Progenitor Tectonic Tide. You can see burst damage 661%. Since there's no word following this, his burst scales off of attack, and so does the Fatal Blossom damage. Each Fatal Blossom, you can see 129.6% each. Percent attack. So Albedo has this really weird split scaling going on. I think it's been weird since day one. I don't think this is something that's like new now that we have different characters, you know? But if I'm going to compare him to a character like Chiori, because in my opinion, Albedo and Chiori do very similar things. People can disagree with that if they want to, but I mean, they're both like, place down a geo thing that deals off-field geo damage, and their burst deals geo damage. So I think they do very similar things. So if we're going to compare Albedo to Chiori and see what Chiori's stuff does, so her skill, she dashes forward and she summons the Tamoto doll, but the damage she deals is based on her attack and her defense. Same thing with her burst. Her burst, she deals AoE geo damage based on her attack and defense. Now you might say, isn't that also split scaling? You can say yeah, but not necessarily, actually. When we look at Chiori's scalings, it's based on both, yes, but it's kind of the thing where I talked about, if you watched my video about who to pull for. At the beginning of 5.0, we got to choose a free standard 5-star. When I talked about Dea, I said something about how if you're going to choose a stat for her, because she had the similar thing where it's based on attack and HP, you choose a stat and you stick with it. So kind of pick a lane and drive in that lane. Do not go into any other lane. So with Chiori, it's very similar. You either choose attack or defense to build on her, and then you stick with that stat and you'll see the outcome of it, right? You'll see her do more damage because you've decided to stick with either attack or defense. So yeah, in my opinion, that is one issue with Albedo's kit, is the fact that he has this split scaling, and it's not that his burst and skill scale with attack and defense like Chiori. It's that they scale on attack and defense in a way that if you choose one, you're decreasing the damage of the other. So it's essentially, if you choose to build full attack, the cast of his skill and his burst will deal a lot of damage, but then the blossoms within his skill, the solar isotoma, the transient blossom damage, will not do a whole lot of damage, and that's kind of what you want Albedo to be doing. Because he's a sub DPS that deals damage from off-field, you want his off-field damage to be high. So that's why people suggest, like, pure defense builds. That's why you'll see recommended weapons, ignore this. You'll see people suggest, you know, this one from the event because it's defense, like pure defense. The off-field damage he deals with his skill is the most important part of his kit. But you also have to ask questions like, well, why does he scale with attack then? Yeah, just this confusing, like, why does part of his kit scale off of defense when the rest of it scales off of attack? That doesn't seem to make much sense. Yeah, so if I were to change something about this character, what would I start with? Well, obviously, I think I would start with the split scaling. I think for Albedo to be a character who works a little bit better and does more damage, I think he has the potential to deal even more damage if his kit was full defense scaling, and I'm not talking about normal and charge attacks, where I think it would be interesting if they played around with something like that. As we've seen in Honkai Star Rail, a character like Adventuring whose normal attacks actually do scale with defense. I think that's very interesting, but I don't think it's a necessary thing we need in Genshin, especially since Albedo's not a character who deals damage with his normal and charge attacks, right? His whole thing is skill and burst damage, mainly skill damage, but, you know. Yeah, I think the first thing I would change is that the cast of his skill and his burst would deal damage based on his defense. It would just all be defense scaling. Now, the numbers specifically, I'm not a numbers gal. I don't know much about the numbers, right? Like I said, not a game designer, so I don't know what percentages I would use, but I think I would change that because he's a character who needs defense, and if you're gonna give him this weird split scaling stuff, he's not gonna reach a potential that I think is good. And now, I think another thing I would probably change is we saw the thing with the elemental mastery increase. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think it doesn't really fit when you're a Geo character, unless you make other ways in which he would scale with elemental mastery. If he was like full elemental mastery scaling, that might make more sense. You know, we see a character like Lolly who scales with elemental mastery, even though maybe she's not really dealing reaction damage. Like, her shield scales with elemental mastery. So if Albedo was a character who, like, his damage scaled with elemental mastery, and maybe even, like, the shields from his crystallized reaction scale with elemental mastery, that would be fine. And now you might say, but the shield for crystallized, like the shield strength for crystallized reactions, does scale with elemental mastery. Yes, but in my opinion, crystallized shield reaction, elemental mastery, no one cares about that. I'm gonna be completely honest. No one builds a Geo character for elemental mastery because of the shields that you get from crystallize. I think crystallize should, if it is a reaction that wants to utilize shielding, there should be a little bit something more to that. This is another thing that I just think Geo as a whole needs, is just a different reaction, or a more buffed reaction. I just think crystallize is a reaction that doesn't do a whole lot, and trying to pretend like elemental mastery scaling is good on Geo characters for the crystallized shields is like, who are you kidding? That's not gonna work. In my opinion. I should probably say that. People might have different opinions on that. So what would I change about Albedo then if I don't want him to be boosting elemental mastery? I think boosting just damage would be good. I think maybe after casting his burst, the entire party getting like a damage boost would be great. Again, I don't know what the percentage would be for that. Something not overly broken. We're not looking to make this character extremely busted. He is a 5-star though. Keep that in mind, because I feel like maybe he shouldn't be at this rate, but I love Albedo. He should be a 5-star. But HOYO-verse, why didn't you just put him on the standard banner? Because good grief, where is our 5-star standard Geo character? So I think just a team-wide damage boost would be good, or maybe not even after he cast his burst. I feel like his burst is completely unnecessary in some versions of teams, or like in certain rotations. You might not want this character to be bursting, like triggering his burst. If you're playing a version of a team that has Albedo in it and you're not really using his burst, you're not really going to be utilizing a damage boost in that way. In this case, not utilizing the elemental mastery boost, but I think if he did do a team-wide damage boost with his burst, you might not be obtaining that. Now, if he did do that, I think you would be bursting more often on him, right? But that's not what we're talking about. A way of changing that would just to change that when you cast his skill, allies within the field of the solar isotoma have their damage increase. I think that's a good one. I think also maybe potentially putting interruption resistance on his kit would be good. We see that with Dea. When you're in her skill, I think you get increased interruption resistance, which is really nice for certain characters, especially if you're doing like charge attack bow characters or even just normal attacking other characters, because they can get interrupted really easily. I also think maybe having him just increase defense for party members could be good. I know Goro does that, so I feel like we don't really need that on Albedo. I also think when Albedo was first released, the only other defense scaling character we had was Noelle, I believe. So I don't think that would have been really necessary. Attack boosting would have been more useful at the time. I think now, because we have characters who are scaling with attack, HP, and defense, elemental mastery even, I don't think it's a necessity to have like a single stat that he boosts. And we can save that stuff for like artifacts, right? We have Noblesse Oblige. Yes, I'm saying oblige. If I ever said oblige in the past, I know I was wrong. I know a lot of people say oblige too, but it's noblesse oblige. That's actually how you're supposed to say it. He could even boost like elemental damage for all elemental types, like all elemental and physical damage with his skill or with his burst. My idea is that when you're inside of his skills field, you have those buffs. I think that would be good, because he's a sub DPS, like I mentioned, right? But I think a lot of sub DPS characters at this point are either good enough at damage that they can also just be considered an off-field DPS. I'm thinking of a character like Yelan, where I don't entirely know about all of her buffs and stuff. I don't know if she buffs damage in any way, or if that comes with constellations. I'm not too familiar with her because I don't personally own her, but I know her damage can be quite high. And so you can kind of consider her off-field DPS, even though she's off-field. When I think of a sub-DPS, I think of someone dealing damage from off-field, because the main carry is usually the one on-field, but that's not always the case. Also, a character like Xiangling, she can be an off-field DPS because her burst deals so much damage. But then think of a character like Xingqiu, who, yeah, his off-field damage can be quite good, but also, I know with constellations at least, he provides a little bit more. I believe that with one of Xingqiu's constellations, he can decrease enemies' Hydra resistance through his burst, or maybe it's through his skill. I don't remember exactly. Maybe I should have done more research before speaking. But I know he has that as one of his constellations, and I also know his skill gives a form of healing and like damage reduction as well. And it's like Albedo can grant a shield if you have triggered the crystallized reaction, so he has that. But I just feel like there's more here that he could have done, right? Like, what if a character like Xingqiu, who's a 4-star, and yes, he's one of the most broken 4-stars in the game, even after all these years, but if you have a 4-star who offers more kit-wise than you do, there must be something wrong here, like, yeah. So what, I guess, in summary, would I be changing? We can talk about that a little bit. I think overall, Albedo is a character who has a lot of potential, and I think when he first came out, he was good. But I think even when he came out, there was some confusion around the split scaling, because that doesn't make much sense. If you're gonna make a defense scaling character, then you gotta go all in. Bust, or maybe all. Anyway. Sorry. So I would change his skills, cast, and his bursts damage to be based on defense. And honestly, maybe even just increase their overall damage, because he deals good damage, right? But I feel like it's sometimes a little lackluster. We don't need to be increasing his damage necessarily. That's not the whole thing. I would change his passive talent of Elemental Mastery to be a damage boosting one, or something to do with interruption resistance. I think a good thing to do would be changing the way Crystallize works with him specifically. I had an idea about this for a character in the past, like a character who like, oh, when you trigger Crystallize and this character is in the party, Crystallize will actually deal extra damage, like kind of something like Melt, Vaporize, you know? Something like that. Or when members of the party, besides Albedo himself, trigger a crystallized reaction, they gain elemental damage bonus like I mentioned, or just an overall damage bonus. Maybe their attack and defense get boosted. Maybe all stats get boosted by a certain percent. I think an all stat boost would be kind of insane. I don't think that's a great idea. Or maybe even something like Rosaria. We have a character like Rosaria who increases the crit rate of nearby party members when she casts her burst. It's her 4th Ascension passive, yeah. Casting Rites of Termination, which Rites of Termination is her burst. So casting that increases crit rate of all nearby party members except herself by 50%. Of her crit rate for 10 seconds, and this can't exceed a certain amount. So I think something like that, maybe increasing crit damage instead of crit rate, or I think he could have boosted other stats besides Elemental Mastery. Change the scalings, change the passive talents, and I think you got yourself a more solid version of Albedo, in my opinion. I think not giving him a signature weapon until like a random event was also kind of horrible. Like, I think that really harmed him as a character. I think every 5-star character having a signature weapon is very nice. Like, do I understand maybe why they didn't do this in the earlier stages of the game? Yes, but also I felt like with some of the earlier characters, the earlier 5-stars, they had standard banner weapons that worked really well with their kits, like Klee and Lost Prayer / Skyward Atlas, like, good options for her. Albedo, Skyward Blade is an ER weapon, and he doesn't need ER. He has a 40 energy cost burst, and that doesn't require an ER weapon. And then you have Primordial Jade Cutter, which is a crit rate weapon, which is really nice. Yeah, that stat is good on a character like Albedo. It increases his attack based on his HP, and he shouldn't be attack or HP scaling. He should be defense scaling, or if he's gonna be pure attack scaling, change the scaling on his skill to be attack scaling, right? So yeah, I guess that's kind of all I wanted to talk about. I felt like there was going to be more to this than just like me yapping about split scalings, but those were kind of the main ideas I wanted to portray, right? And I think if HOYO-verse ever decides to buff Genshin characters like they have for our Star Rail characters, which is one of the reasons I was inspired to make these kind of videos, because I was like, well, if HSR can buff its characters, why can't Genshin? Now, do I think changing a character's kit scalings is the same as the buffs that they're probably doing in HSR? No, I don't think that's probably what they'll be doing. I think they'll just probably be increasing damage or changing the kit just slightly enough that it makes it more meta, quote unquote. I'm not really a meta slave. I don't really care about the meta that much, but I do care about the characters I like, and I want the characters I like to be good, and seeing people just ignore this beautiful boy is a shame in my opinion. So yeah, if you're like me and you really like Albedo and you're like, dang, where did the scalings go? Where did my boy go? Why did he fall off so easily? This video is for you. Just something I wish they would change, right? I've just always thought the cast of his skill and the damage from his burst being attack scaling were just not good for his kit. Maybe they were just experimenting with defense scaling characters in the beginning and they didn't know if pure defense scaling would be a good thing. But then they released a character like Ito. Now, I'm going to say that Ito is not entirely defense scaling either, but I feel like it works so much better, especially when he's in his burst form, like the scalings he has. And then you have a character like Chiori who is quote-unquote split scaling, but it's you pick a lane and stick to it. It's not a have to build both to get good damage, but then you're actually not getting good damage because if you build an attack and a defense scaling Albedo, both of your damage sources are going to be lackluster. Or it's like if you try to do both, you're going to be disappointed. And if you try to do just one, there's also going to be a slight bit of disappointment there. Where a character like Chiori, it's just you choose defense, which is what I think they recommend to do. You choose just defense, and then all of her damage works well. So that's kind of all I want to talk about today. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, I have more ideas for characters. I think there are other characters in the game that could use buffs or maybe a different star rating status. With all that said, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.